Well, thanks for inviting me. It's always great to be at an ASLE meeting. I get lured by Ken's offer to cook Mediterranean salmon for me, which is a one of his finest dishes and a great treat for me. So that's the main reason I'm here, other than the meeting. But thanks for the introduction, Ken. And I thought I'd show kind of a combination of pictures of both what we produce for, or what I produced for Agency France Press and media use, but also some behind the scenes look at the space shuttle program. And I thought I'd start out with a map to kind of just show people the whole launch complex and where everything is. And this is just a Google Earth view of the Kennedy Space Center, the main areas that we were at. And so near the bottom of the picture is the big vehicle assembly building, which you've probably seen in pictures. Just across a parking lot and a road from that is the main media center. So that's where we would do a lot of our work. To the left is the shuttle landing facility, the runway where they try to land most of the flights. There's also the landing strip at Edwards Air Force Base in California if the weather's bad in Florida. So all the shuttles were launched from pad 39A. There's a part of Launch Complex 39, which is the two pads. So the recent Artemis mission went off from pad 39B because 39A has now basically been converted to a SpaceX launch facility. So they renovated the whole tower there, and so pad B is, I think, where the Artemis missions will be launched from now. And so I'll show you a few more detailed shots of the layout as I go along. And most of the time it was kind of this buildup. I would often go to Florida 2 or 3 days before the launch. We would need to get our equipment ready. As Ken pointed out, we would also be able to install remote cameras very close to the launch pad to get closer views. And then so that usually took a couple of days. And so here's actually the office that we worked from. We called it the Rockstar Motorhome. It was one of these giant motorhomes that one of our freelance photographers, Bruce Weaver, who was based in Titusville, which is the nearest big city to the Space Center. He had a friend who owned this motorhome, and so we would be able to rent it from him for actually a pretty cheap price. The other news agencies, they had the more or less semi-permanent, essentially a motorhome that was built into the ground, and then but AFP didn't want to spend the money to do that, so we ended up just renting the motorhome for the period of the mission, which usually was anywhere from 7 to 14 days, depending on how long the astronauts were up in space. So we would hang out. It was a great motorhome. As you could see, it had an awning that we could kind of sit in the shade, depending on where the sun was, and it was air conditioned, had all the power and internet. So we would come back here to do work, sending our pictures and preparing the cameras for the launch. And you can see in the background is the vehicle assembly building. So we were basically across the parking lot from the VAB. Motorhome turns out to be a great place to take naps. Bruce, I guess, snapped a picture of me in the napping away. Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. Let me see. Minimize that. And minimize that.
I think go down one more. Floating.
Oh,
Yeah,
floating.
floating meat.
Okay. All right, there we go. All right. Yeah, sorry about that. And then so the little L's in the corner, there was a big sign as you drove into the launch complex that said, it would say, when I would arrive there 3 days before launch, it would say L-3. So I asked somebody, what does that mean? And they said, oh, that's their NASA speak for launch -3 days, -2 days, and -1 day. So this is an L-2, 2 days before the launch. We'd be able to go out in the morning and set out tripods where we want to put remote cameras. You couldn't put the actual cameras. You could put a tripod or something marking the spot. And we were allowed pretty close. So this is complex 39A, and at the very center is the shuttle, launch pad. And so the X's are where we could actually put remote controlled cameras. I'll go in a little bit more detail about how those work. The white X's were kind of the general areas where we could put things. And the yellow X's, at the last few missions, they allowed us to go inside this perimeter fence. There's a fence about a quarter mile around the launch pad. And up until that point, it was basically just the NASA photographers and a couple of the contractors that would be able to put cameras there. But then at the last 3 missions, they allowed a lot of the media to put the cameras there. And so as we're driving around, you had to be escorted around the base from the media center. And there were a lot of retired Apollo engineers who stayed in the area, retired and were living in the area. And they would volunteer through the media center because they knew their way around the whole base. And so we were able, NASA had a whole fleet of vans, and then we were just assigned a van and a driver. And so our driver was a fellow named Gene. He was very good, knew where he was going, and knew his way around the base pretty well. And every day we'd be taking what you call feature pictures, just pictures to send out on the AFP wire to the different clients, just showing the preparation as NASA and the Kennedy Space Center were getting ready for the shuttle launch. And at some point, you reach a point in one of the roads where all the signs are pointing to all these different things, to wherever you're going to. And so at this point, we would see the shuttle on the launch pad with what's called the rotating service structure, that big structure that's sort of covering up the orbiter part, the actual part that the astronauts are in, for different maintenance, and that gets rolled back just before the launch. So on the day before launch, at dawn, we gather in the parking lot, all the vans that are going out to the remote camera areas, and a NASA security comes by with a dog and sniffs all the equipment, making sure all the equipment's pretty clean. So the media that actually gets to go out and put the remote cameras out it was a relatively small group. There were the wire services, which are us, AFP, the Associated Press, Reuters, a group called the European Press Photo Agency, and Getty Images. And there were 2 newspapers, the Orlando Sentinel and Florida Today. There's a photographer I met with the Orlando Sentinel named Red Huber, he had shot every single shuttle launch since the very first mission. So that was pretty impressive to hear his stories, because living in Orlando, that was one of their big stories that they would cover is the space program. And so he started at the very beginning of the very first shuttle launch. So this is Bruce, the AFP stringer that lives in Titusville, and this is basically one style of remote camera setup that we did. He constructed these boxes out of some sort of fiber board, and they were very, very efficient. And as it turns out, they look a little flimsy at first, but they were quite strong. He managed to put in 2 spaces for a camera oriented in a vertical position and one in a horizontal position. The front of it is open to the elements, but the top of the lid, which I'll show you from a different direction, extends pretty far out, so it protects the camera from all the elements. And of course, as Sam knows, in Florida, there's a lot of elements. There's at any given point during the day or night, it could just start pouring down rain. This solution worked pretty well because if you didn't have an enclosure like this for the cameras, you'd have to wrap your camera in plastic, and under the floor of the sun, things would start baking away with the plastic sealed. And so this at least kept air flowing through, and it helped prevent in some ways your lens from fogging up and things like that. Although it's hard to counteract the Florida humidity sometimes. In the very center between the two cameras, you see a little box there, and it was our sound trigger. The escort that we had, Gene, who was the retired Apollo engineer, he actually devised this thing. It's a Radio Shack at the time sold a little analog sound meter. And so it would measure the sound in decibels for whatever you needed to measure. So he modified it so that there were two little outputs. The Nikon and Canon and some of the other manufacturers sold a cable that hooked to your camera, and the other end of the cable had two banana plugs on it, so that you would plug that into the sound meter. You'd set it at a certain decibel level, and depending on how close the camera was to the launch pad, and when the engine started, it exceeded that level. It triggered, so the camera started firing, and until the rocket reached a certain height and the decibel level dropped a certain level, and then the camera would stop firing. So it was a pretty simple method, because it didn't involve a timer. You didn't need to actually set a timer for the launch time, and it would just react to the sound. The drawback was oftentimes helicopters would make low flights. The NASA security would be flying around, so you'd look at your we were shooting digital cameras at the time, and you look at the memory card, and there'd be a lot of pictures of just the launch pad and nothing happening. And it was probably because a helicopter flew by, triggering the camera for a couple of seconds, and then it would fly away. But for the most part, the triggers worked pretty efficiently. So we were pretty happy about that. And here I am with the housing that Bruce built. You can see how deep the top of the lid is. You couldn't shoot anything with a really wide angle lens. Probably the widest would be about a 35 millimeter, maybe a 28 millimeter. But from the distances that we were from the launch pad, a 35 millimeter was actually wide enough that you needed. And then you could put a telephoto lens on the other camera if you wanted to. The other piece of equipment that I never knew that I would need for something like this was waders that I have on, because we're in this, as you could see, we're in this pretty swampy area, and you didn't want to go barefoot in there, because you didn't know what was in the swamp in terms of both animals, but also just things that were in there that could be toxic. So me and then Mike Brown is the photographer behind me. We both have waders on, and we're going in, and this area was actually nice. It was west of pad 39A. And it often had a lot of water in it, so you would get a nice picture of the launch with the flame from the rocket reflecting off the water. And I'll show you some of those pictures in a little bit. This is a second kind of setup where in our van we also took around the Nikon folks. Nikon and Canon both had representatives there, and they would bring caseloads of cameras and lenses that you could check out. You could get on loan from them for the duration of the launch. So we would check out a few cameras to use as the remote cameras, and then we just let them come along in our van, and they could set up one or two of their cameras and get some pictures too. So, and couple of the Nikon guys had these super heavy duty surveyor tripods, these yellow tripods, and then they built a little platform to hold the cameras. We put attached ball heads to the platform, and then we'd have to wrap the camera in plastic, though. We didn't have the housing like Bruce had built. But it's pretty efficient. You could see we put 4 cameras on this one tripod, and it's pretty sturdy because the tripod was pretty heavy. And this is inside the pad as you get, as we're probably just a couple hundred feet from the actual vehicle on the launch pad, and we're setting up, and Bruce is by the Nikon tripod with a couple of our cameras, and you could see them. We've wrapped 4 of them in plastic now, and then of course you got to remember to put a hole where the lens is and make sure the lens is exposed. And then Nikon had a pretty fancy remote trigger where they could actually set a timer, so they would set it so that the timer would start about maybe around the launch window. Usually it's a plus or minus 5 minutes around the launch time, and they would start the timer maybe about 10 minutes before the actual launch time. And then we would avoid any kind of interference from low-flying helicopters or airplanes the day before the launch. So this is all. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Frank.
In the center, that looked like a mailbox.
Yeah, it's funny. People, I think that might have been Red Huber's enclosure for his camera. I think he decided that this just a cheap mailbox wasn't actually a good enclosure, so he used that, and that was probably one of the funnier looking remote setups out there, but pretty unusual because he kept on that little flag and everything. So it's pretty funny. One mission we were setting up inside this perimeter, and they said, "Oh, you gotta wear these coveralls, these white coveralls." And so we were all going, "Oh, this is pretty cool. We get to put on these white coveralls, and we look like rocket scientists and all that." And so we're setting up our stuff, and we're just standing around talking, and somebody said, "Well, why do you think we have to wear these coveralls?" And the AP guy was pretty smart. He kind of knew a lot of the inside stuff at NASA. He said, because if there's a hydrogen fire, the hydrogen burns, the flame is invisible. So if there's a hydrogen fire, your coveralls will catch on fire, so we'll know there's a hydrogen fire. And so everybody goes, "Oh no!" And because in the shuttle within this perimeter there's the huge tanks of hydrogen and oxygen that were going to be loaded probably in about 12 hours into the big external tank for the main engines. And so here we are running around in our cotton coveralls ready to catch fire in case there's a hydrogen fire. There's lots of wildlife. The Space Center is basically a wildlife preserve. It's next to a recognized wildlife preserve, but there's not, except for where the launch pad is, the VAB and various buildings, there's not a huge amount of development. So we would actually see these fairly large alligators in the swampy areas, and we were always kind of leery when we were wading out into an area so that we wouldn't disturb anything or scare any alligators. But of course, for photographers, this is great because we've got all of our big lenses, long telephoto lenses. So we jump out of the van and we see if we saw an alligator and start shooting pictures, and that was always added a little bit of excitement to the day. And there was also we would see these small packs of wild pigs out running around. There's the VAB in the background, and a lot of water birds. I think this heron just caught a little lunch there. So especially a lot of birds around the watery areas. And we get a lot of photos of essentially the shuttle with the service structure around it. So you couldn't really see much. It was nice that they kept the external tank orange because then you could actually recognize it. And we get a lot of sort of nice scenic shots like this. This is actually kind of a very rare picture because on the left-hand side, you see the shuttle, and I can't remember which mission this was, but then that's pad 39A. And if you look over to the right, you see another orange tank. So that's a second shuttle. This is 39B had also a shuttle on it. And this was, actually, I think it's STS-127, which was the last mission that replaced equipment on the Hubble Space Telescope. And so the shuttle on the left was going to be going to the Hubble Space Telescope, which is in a different orbit than the International Space Station. And so this was after the Columbia disaster. And so the NASA decided they needed to have a second shuttle essentially on standby on the second launch pad in the event that there's any kind of trouble with the shuttle that was repairing Hubble, because from the orbit that the Hubble is in, they couldn't reach the International Space Station if there was any problem. And so that there was that second shuttle standing by on 39B. The other thing that happens is that on the about 12 hours before the launch, they do this rotating service structure rollback. In the NASA speak, it's the RSS rollback. And what happens with a lot of situations where they only can have one or two photographers, we call it a pool position. So one photographer will go and shoot pictures, but then you have to share your pictures with all the other agencies that want them, the other wire services like AP and Reuters and EPA, and the newspapers that were within our small group. AFP happened to be and then we take turns. There's a list, and we take turns. And this was the very last mission, the very last shuttle mission, STS-135, which was Atlantis, and AFP happened to be in line for whatever launch pad pool position there was going to be. And it turns out it was on top of the rotating service structure during the rollback. And so they could only have one media photographer there. There was also the NASA photographer, and so I was able to. That was the I think one of the better views that I had of the space shuttle, because you're literally right on top of it. And so this is the RSS as it's just starting to roll back from the orbiter and the rockets. So the other people are there. A lot of booster and rocket contractors that were able also to stand on the RSS. And as you can see, it's a pretty great view, and you could see out toward the Atlantic Ocean and the surrounding lands around the launch complex. And you realize how flat that part of Florida is, because you really can see quite a bit without any. There's nothing in between you and literally the horizon, and depending on which way you're looking. It was nice. You can get a lot of kind of close-up shots, close-up views of the shuttle itself, and of course, photographers love to take pictures of each other. This is Bill Ingalls. He's the main NASA photographer based in Washington, D.C., but he would come down to Florida for a lot of the launches. And then I had Bill offered to take some pictures of me. So this is as the RSS is moving back, and you can see that great view of the shuttle behind us. We're walking down, and we stopped at the level of the access level for the astronauts to actually load into the space shuttle. And as we're walking back toward the main part of the tower, I saw this door, obviously a bathroom door, with this kind of, which I thought was sort of a humorous sign that they were told, you got to close this before the launch, otherwise you don't want the bathroom to get messed up, I guess. And so with the rotating service structure, which is on the left side of this picture, with that rotated back, you get the full view of the shuttle, the external tank, and the solid rocket boosters. So that made for some nice pictures. If they did it at night, this was Endeavour, and it had rained just before they did the rollback of the RSS. So this made for some interesting photos. And you could also get a couple of close-ups of the orbiter itself, and you can kind of get an idea of the scale. The very bottom part, you see this walkway, and you could see on either side of the engines, you could see some workmen there, and so it kind of gives you the idea of the scale of how big the shuttle was. And if the RSS rollback happened at sunset, we would get some pretty nice pictures as they turn on these pretty high intensity lamps at night to light up the shuttle. So on launch day, we did even more remotes. This was outside the astronauts' quarters right before they're walking out, and so there was a walkway that was too tight to have a whole lot of photographers stand. So they fashioned a couple of these bars, and we could put a camera that we could control with usually a wireless remote, and get photos of the astronauts head on as they're coming out. So this is Scott Andrews, who was with Canon at the time, and he's sort of inspecting one of his cameras. I think my camera might be in that group on the left-hand side on the lower bar, and so we would take turns setting up each of the cameras. And then that would be sort of one of the many remote controlled cameras that we had. So this is the view from the remote camera. As you can see, the astronauts come straight out toward that pillar, and then they make a left-hand turn toward the Astrovan, and then they all line up for a picture right outside the Astrovan. And sometimes some of the astronauts would have some fans in the crowd waiting for them. This is Leland. I can't remember his last name now, but it turns out he had previously worked at NASA Langley in Virginia, and so I think there were some former co-workers wishing him happy birthday, and they created this big sign, which was kind of amazing. So there's Leland Melvin is his name, so that's him on the right, waving to everybody. And I think this might have been his first mission. This is one of the Atlantis launches, and might have been his first mission into space. I think he flew on 2 missions. I looked behind me once as we were kind of setting up, and I noticed a sign up for a parking lot, for a parking space right near the astronauts' quarters, and I thought, wow, that'd be a great that's sort of a funny sign in a parking lot. I guess no one's going to park there unless you really are an astronaut. And so you might ask, what is my friend Pierre doing here? And he's setting up another kind of a remote controlled camera. And right now we're on the roof of the vehicle assembly building. That was one of the positions that we could be for the actual launch. So here's Pierre from behind, and he's setting up the camera so that sometimes people use a pretty long wire. I often used a radio controlled remote trigger on the camera because he would be standing. I think his camera might be the empty one there between these 2 fellows in the center to get a wider shot of the actual launch. And so sometimes we'd be carrying about 3 to 4 cameras up to the roof of the vehicle assembly building, and one of them would be used for this wide angle picture. And so here's the view you get. This is the camera that I set up, and let's see. I'm on the left-hand side of this picture, the 3rd person in with the hat on, with a light-colored hat. And so I think this might have been a Discovery launch, and so I could trigger this camera. I just wired this into the telephoto lens that I have. And so the camera is firing every time I fire a shot from my camera. So I get a whole series of pictures, and the one where the shuttle's fairly high up in the frame usually works out pretty well. And then so I'll go over some of the launch pictures that we get. So from that position, from the top of the VAB building, we get this, and from the VAB to the launch pad it's just over 3 miles, so it's a pretty good view. And I like that location because you're quite high up, and so that you avoid a lot of the heat waves that sometimes form in the Florida heat that coming off the ground, and so that helps. And this is pretty much a full frame shot. I usually would take a 400 millimeter lens, and at that time, Nikon had a 1.7x teleconverter. So I think that made it about a 680 millimeter lens or somewhere around there. And you didn't want anything too much tighter than that, because sort of the idea is that you get the steam and smoke coming off either side, as well as the shuttle lifting off. Carl,
back on one slide.
Yeah.
He's a line that goes from the space shuttle straight down to like the ground. You see that?
Right. Let's see. Carl's pointing out. He's pointing out this. That's a shadow. That's the shadow of the steam, of the smoke.
I was going to send this to George. Can you hear me?
Yeah, George.
Yeah, I was going to point that out. Kind of struck me. So that's the shadow of the steam on a layer of stratus, or I'm sorry, cirrostratus or something like this. Very thin, transparent clouds.
Yeah. So it does show. It is kind of odd when you see that, but that's the shadow of
Yeah.
the contrail. As it
It's
goes
like
up.
somebody took an eraser and
Yeah,
kind of. Well,
yeah.
Stan, since I have your attention, what focal length did you use for this one?
For this one, let's see. I usually would have a 24 to 70 millimeters. So this is probably about 24 millimeters.
Yeah, that's an awesome shot.
And thanks, because it kind of you have a little bit of perspective with the photographers at the bottom of the.
Yeah, I mean everybody's
It's a good.
bending down.
Right,
Awesome.
right. So we're craning our necks as the shuttle's going up and higher, and so and you can see the TV is next to me, and that guy's really bending down because I think he's got a 90-degree viewfinder, but the angle gets pretty steep as it's going up. But thanks for the analysis of the shadow. Let's see. So here's the launch from a telephoto lens. And then I would have a second camera with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on it. And so this is at about maybe 170, 180 millimeters, kind of a little broader view of the wetlands in the foreground and the looking out toward the Atlantic Ocean.
Is it true, Stan, that they flood the launch pad at the time it's coming out?
What they do is that there's water that flows underneath the launch pad. They did that during Gemini and Apollo, and it's because what you see here here and in the other pictures on the left and the right is mostly steam. It's not smoke. It's steam. When the flame, of course, hits the water, it immediately vaporizes into steam. And the water is used, it's a sound suppression device. What they discovered, I think starting in Apollo, is that the force of the rocket engines created so much vibration. It was vibrating both the rocket and the capsule attached to it. And water helps suppress essentially the sound that the rocket creates hits the bottom of the flame trench, which is made out of concrete, and it bounces back up toward the rocket. So they wanted to try to prevent that from happening, and the water helps that a lot. It essentially suppresses the sound waves from bouncing up and hitting the rocket and disturbing the rocket as it's because it's both the Apollo and the shuttle were on the launch pad for about 5 to 6 seconds as the main engines were building up thrust. And so there's the potential for a lot of damage to happen if the sound isn't suppressed. Yes, there's. Yeah. I don't know if that's. I don't think it's a rainbow. It might be a little bit of lens flare from my lens.
Hey, Stan,
Yeah.
how do you keep the brightness of the exhaust flames from washing out the photo? I mean, it's got to be like watching the sun.
It's basically a daylight exposure, and that from whatever the exposure is for a sunny day in Florida, that's exposure that when I first started out, that's what the photographers recommended I use it because the flame itself like the very center is kind of blown out, but at least because the picture you want is sort of something like this or something like this, and so that the flame itself isn't super bright, but it's pretty bright. And if you're at that like a daylight exposure setting for the scene, then you're kind of within the limits of both the digital frame, and so it seems to work out pretty good.
Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. And then some of the greater views I think were initially after the shuttle lifts off, and it starts a roll program. You probably hear it on the voice communication. So the entire craft starts to roll so that as it reaches orbit, the shuttle is pointed tail down at the Earth. That's the attitude they wanted as it's going into orbit. And so as it rolls, I mean initially it's kind of facing a little bit toward us, but as it rolls, you kind of get this nice side view, and so you get a great profile as the shuttle is lifting off. And as it goes further up, you're basically seeing the tail of the rocket engines as it's going higher up into the air. And one of the things that was kind of astonishing, I saw this through the viewfinder and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. I kept taking pictures and then I looked at it later and was asking people, and it was a very, very clear day. And so you could actually see the solid rocket booster separation going on. And so the bright object in the middle is the main engines of the shuttle, and then the solid rocket boosters on either side. And this is a pretty big crop into a much wider picture. This is still with the telephoto lens, and so I cropped in pretty much, and it held the detail, and it was kind of amazing to actually see it happening. You see it, I think, on TV, because the NASA has these pretty good cameras with super long telephoto lenses that could track the shuttle. But we just with the camera that I had, I was kind of amazed that I actually could see it and take a photo of it. And sometimes as the launch progresses, you can kind of get some interesting pictures of the contrails. This was a launch right before sunrise, and you could see here's the shuttle going down range. It's essentially higher in altitude, but then going much farther away from Florida. And then the contrails get lit up by the sun, which is still below the horizon at this point, but pretty close to sunrise. Okay, so after the launch, then we go back to the motorhome and spend an hour and a half or 2 hours just editing through the pictures, sending. I would send my pictures to our Washington, D.C. office, and then we would kind of organize the equipment that we had. And usually about 2 hours after launch, they would say that the area near the launch pad is clear, that we could go out and collect our remote control cameras. So we'd go out in our van and find all the spots that we set up cameras. And with the cameras in those boxes, it was actually fairly convenient, because Bruce had attached a camera mount on the bottom of each box, and that mounted onto the tripod mount onto the bottom of the box, and that clipped onto the tripod. So all we needed to do was lift the box up and put it in the van and put the tripod in the van, and we were ready to go on to the next one. And then in the van, then I'd be taking apart each box and pulling out the memory card from each camera and then loading that into my computer. And then we'd do most of the editing back at our motorhome. And so here's what we get from some of the remote controlled cameras. This would be a camera that's closest to the launch pad, one of those inside the perimeter ones. And this is just with a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame digital camera. So you could see how close we would be to the actual launch pad. We would use, we were shooting Nikon back then, so we would use the Nikon D3s that we would get on loan from our friends at Nikon, they were in the trailer right next to us, and with some of the lenses. And again, you didn't need very long telephoto lenses for these remote camera positions, because we were pretty close to the launch pad, as you could see. In this case, I used a fisheye lens that I had just to see what it would look like. And it was pretty dramatic with the steam coming out. And everybody says, "Oh, you won't be able to shoot a shuttle, it's too small." But I think it showed up pretty good. As it got further away, of course, it got a lot smaller in the picture. But then I think this one worked out pretty good. And this was one of the photos from the swampy area. This is actually this is with a 35 millimeter lens, and so it got enough of the swamp. It shows enough detail in the actual shuttle, and it made for a different kind of picture. You could see the flame and the smoke being reflected in the water in front of the camera. There were a few night launches, and those weren't a huge amount of fun, because you're always worried about the actual exposure. And again, people told me just do the daylight exposure, because the flame is going to be really bright. And the only real picture is when the shuttle is pretty close to the launch pad. After that, it's just a picture of a big flame up in the sky, and there's not much. A real problem with especially the remotes, because we put out the remotes the day before the launch, and so at some point we leave the field, and so the camera could be there almost 24 hours. And so you worry about a lot of things. You worry about the camera battery, you worry about the remote control battery. You also worry about the lens just getting fogged because of the moisture in the Florida air. And so here's what a fogged over lens picture at remote camera looks like at a night launch, and kind of artistic, not terribly newsworthy, but I thought it was sort of funny because otherwise it would have made a nice picture, I think, with the reflection in the water. But you got this nice glow from the lens because it was completely fogged up. There's probably rain maybe a couple hours before the launch, and then the humidity is about 100%, so things are starting to fog up, and then here you go. So that was always the big fear. And so after we did the remote cameras, then I would go. We basically kind of pack up everything, and I would usually leave the next day back to New York, and then we would have already planned my return to Florida in about 7 to 10 days, depending on how long the mission was for the landing, for the return of the space shuttle. And so the Kennedy Space Center was the primary landing spot for the shuttle, and Edwards was the backup in case there was weather. And I think there were a couple of missions where I just covered the landing, and there'd be weather, clouds in the Florida, and so the landing was then moved to Edwards. So a couple of times I never saw anything. I went to Florida for a couple of days and never saw the shuttle, because then you would see it on TV in the media center as it landed in a very sunny Edwards Air Force Base, and it's cloudy, maybe raining at Kennedy Space Center. So the landing facility had 2 runways, runway 33, runway 15, and 15,000 feet long, and only 300 feet wide. I think a lot of the shuttle pilots were saying they wished it was maybe about 3,000 feet wide, because I think when you're coming down in a space shuttle and you see this tiny little landing strip, you kind of wish it were a little bit wider. But they all made some successful landings. And so that now our attention goes toward the landing strip area of the facility. When the first landing that I shot, I remember seeing the shuttle entering, and you hear these twin sonic booms as it makes this big curve coming toward Florida. And then you see it coming down, and as it gets down, it's probably several thousand feet, maybe a little bit higher, as it's coming in. And the angle that it's coming down is unbelievably steep, at least compared to commercial airlines. If you see a commercial airline landing, and it looks frightening at first, because it looks like it's just going to go straight into the ground. But apparently that's just the way the shuttle makes their approach. And then they level out at some point, but at this point it's still pretty far away. But it's a fairly steep angle as it's coming down. We had some pool photo positions for the landing, and one of them was essentially right beside the runway at the center point of the runway. So I did a couple of those positions where it was you're very close to the runway. And so I think I maybe used a 200 or 300 millimeter lens for this picture. So it's not you don't need a very long lens for some of the landing positions, which was nice. And you see the orbiter come down, and at this, I think at the midpoint you see the rear and I think the nose gear touching down. And there's a position that was much further down the runway, and you could get an angle when the parachutes come out. I was always amazed at how dirty the shuttle looks. If you kind of look at the side of it, you think, well, there's not much dirt that you think of in space. But I think just coming in and out of the atmosphere and all that stuff, it just picks up a little bit of dirt and all that. And I mean, they pay a lot of attention to the tiles and stuff on the underside of the wing and the shuttle, but I guess they don't really need to clean too much of the side of the orbiter. Another pool position that we had was depending on the runway. The shuttle would have to land on runway 33, which was from. Ken, is that north to south? 33 is
33 is almost north.
okay. Looking
360 is north.
yeah, looking north. So then, if it landed on runway 33, the orbiter would pass the VAB building as it's headed toward the runway. So from the roof, you were actually at the level of the shuttle as it's coming down. So it was a bizarre feeling as you saw it coming down, and you realize that you're basically be at the level as it passes the VAB, and so that was very strange. And so that's Titusville in the background of this picture, looking basically straight across the river there. And it was sort of this majestic view as you see it coming down, and from that angle, it almost looks like it's kind of going in slow motion as it's heading toward the runway. And so you see the swampland behind the shuttle as it's coming down. The real exciting pole position was called under the wing position, and so that was you're essentially on the tarmac. So we had an escort that would once all the landing crew was out there with their vehicles and all set, then they allowed us onto the tarmac, and so you were actually on the tarmac with the shuttle and the astronauts and administrators and everybody there. You get a really close-up view of the orbiter itself. They said don't touch the wings and don't touch the tires because they've used the brakes pretty heavily, so the brakes are super hot. So they said just don't go near the wheels, and then as you could see, so we were kind of literally under the wing. You could reach up and you could touch one of the tiles. They said don't touch the tiles. So they told you not to do those. So this is Charles Bolden, the then national administrator and the commander of this flight. And so it was kind of interesting. You can kind of see how the shuttle itself was constructed, and you can get a close look at the tiles that were under the wing itself. And the astronauts, we actually didn't see them come off of the shuttle itself. There'd be one of these movable, almost like a mobile home that would move up to the shuttle, and they would go into that. There'd be a doctor there that would look them over in case there was any medical issues. And then they would actually we would see them coming out of this portable unit and greeting the NASA administrators and everybody else. So then they walk over to a microphone and give a few statements after they've landed. But they like to do a little walk around of the orbiter itself and take a look at the underneath and the condition of everything. I was with Gail, who was my escort on this flight, and we stopped and we see this this stuff spray painted on the runway, and we kept she's I think she was with the propulsion departments at the Kennedy Space Center, so she kind of knew her way around the whole shuttle environment. And she says, "What is NLG? STS-133 was the flight designated number, Space Transport Systems flight number 133. So this was the last flight for Discovery." And she said, "NLG, what does NLG mean?" And we couldn't figure it out. And then she finally said, "Oh, that right behind it, right there, is the nose landing gear." Oh. And so. She said what NASA wanted to do is where the last three shuttles, where they stopped on the landing strip, they were going to put I think a plaque saying the final mission for Discovery ended exactly here. And so they wanted to mark that spot before they moved the orbiter back to the facility, and so that's so she managed to figure that out. So that was interesting. This was the mission. Couple of the missions after Columbia. One of them, I think, on some of the high-speed launch video, they saw a piece of the external tank foam hit the underside of the shuttle, so they're a little bit worried that there was basically a hole in the tiles, and not, of course, obviously not as bad as what happened to Columbia, but a little bit worried. So the crew is out here taking a look up at the damage, and it turned out to survive. Obviously, survive the reentry into the atmosphere. And so, if you look close, though, it looks like a pretty big, kind of a big hole to me. But they didn't seem too worried about it. And after that, the landing. The landing strip procedures were over, they would tow the shuttle back to this orbiter facility that then would they would do any repairs on the tiles and essentially refurbish the shuttle for the next launch. And so we would able to kind of follow the shuttle. It was very slow going, as you can imagine. They're not going to speed back to the facility, so pretty slow going. So you can get a fair number of pictures as it's being towed back to the orbiter facility.
What are the red hoses on the aft end?
Some of those were I think those might have been power, just to keep some of the systems on the shuttle itself working. There's at least with the you can see the main engines at the back to the on the left-hand side. There are these small reaction controlled thrusters that I think have some pretty toxic chemicals that they use as propellants. And I think some of it is to I think make sure that these propellants don't exit the shuttle as it's being towed along, and because I think they're pretty toxic. But I think a lot of that also is power for the different systems that need to remain on until they get it into the hangar. For the STS-135, which was the final shuttle mission, they kind of allowed us to do anything because it was the last mission. So at the end of the runway, they allowed us to put remote controlled cameras that would, and so this would be, which runway they were using? I think runway 15. And so we were essentially at the end where the shuttle would fly over these cameras, and then we'd get a rear view of the shuttle. And the reason we were here and not on the other end is because the landing was going to be at night, and NASA liked to call it a pre-dawn landing because they said that they've already had the last night landing, and so they refused to say that there was another night landing. So they called it a pre-dawn landing, which is night. But the lights that light up the runway, they're facing, of course, they're facing away from the astronauts. They're lighting up the actual tarmac. And so we would actually take advantage of those lights as the shuttle came down, and then once it actually passes those lights, there's no light that's lighting up the landing strip itself, and so there really would be no picture. But here one of our other photographers took a picture of me. I was late, and so they took me out separately, and I'm trying to set up my camera, and everybody had it wrapped in plastic. And so for the landing itself, we were able to stand on the side of the runway again. And so here's looking into the lights. And so if you're looking at the shuttle as it's coming toward you, of course it's silhouette. There's nothing actually lighting up the landing strip itself. But it made for a pretty dramatic picture, and you could see the contrail, the moisture coming off the edge of the wings there. And so from that remote camera, this was the picture.
Oh,
And
yeah.
for me, this kind of, to me, it was a nice picture because it looks like a spaceship coming down. And so I thought this worked out pretty good, that you could see the shuttle. Yeah, it's funny that you can't really see the tires because the tires are black, so they didn't really reflect much light. You see the moisture coming out, the contrails coming off of the edge of the wings. And so it made for a pretty, to me, a pretty dramatic picture. And it was kind of a nice end to the whole, essentially at that point, the U.S. manned space program came to an end. That was the last shuttle landing, the end of the final mission. So if all the pictures that I took are on gettyimages.com. If you're interested in seeing either my pictures or other shuttle pictures, you just need to search for space shuttle or my name in space shuttle. There is a select pull down menu where you could select. It's the default setting is creative images, but you need to select editorial images to find the shuttle pictures for both the launches and the landings.